Okay, so let's talk about secant, cosecant, and cotangent a little bit, especially in terms of putting these things in the calculator, because most of what we've done up until now has been on the unit circle or on triangles. We've done a little bit with the calculator, but not too much. So the idea, if we don't have something on the unit circle, let's say we have like sine of 35 degrees. Okay, we know that we can put that in the calculator. And if we round it to just 2 decimal places to keep things simple, we get 0.57. Okay, and then now we also know that if we do sine inverse of 0.57, we're going to get 35. Okay, so there's sine and sine inverse. But now what do we do with secant, cosecant, and cotangent? All right. So first, let's start off just getting it into the calculator because we really haven't talked about that. So if we have, let's say we have cosecant of 42. All right, now most calculators don't have specific buttons for cosecant, secant, and cotangent, but we know that cosecant is the same as 1 over sine. So we could do 1 over sine of 42. And we would get 1.49. Okay, so to actually put this in the calculator, we would put it in like this. We would use 1 over sine. All right. Now, if we wanted to find an inverse function, though, that's going to be a little bit different. So y equals cosecant of x, in general, is equal to 1 over sine x. That's what we just saw. All right, now if we look at this first term and last term of this equation, that also means that 1 over y is equal to sine x, if we invert both those sides or cross multiply, however you want to think of it. Okay, so 1 over y is equal to sine x. Okay, that's the same as what we did up above. We did the reverse. And that gives us a way to find the inverse. So if I take inverse sine on both sides, then I'm going to have sine inverse of 1 over y is equal to x. Okay, that's the same as cosecant inverse. Cosecant inverse y. Okay, so if you want to find, so I'm using this line right here to get all of that. Okay, so if we invert both signs, we get 1 over y equals sine x. And then if we take the inverse sine and inverse cosecant, then we can see that inverse cosecant is the same as doing sine of the reciprocal 1 over y. Okay, so that's a little bit confusing as x's and y's. Let's see how it actually works. First let's look at values that we know. Okay, so if we have 2 equals cosecant x, this is actually one that's on the unit circle. That's the same as saying 1/2 is equal to sine x. Okay, we know that. We know that if 2 is cosecant x, then 1/2 is sine. We know that they're reciprocals. And that means that we can take inverse sine on the right side. Sine inverse of 1/2 is equal to x. And we know that sine inverse of 1/2 is equal to pi over 6, or 30. Okay, so if we change it into a sine problem, that's something that we know how to do. And if we look, these two sides are the same. Okay, so if I had taken cosecant inverse from the beginning on the left, I'd have cosecant inverse of 2 is equal to x. So look at, let me block this off, this line right here. Okay, so that's the same as what I was saying down here. Okay, if you want to find cosecant inverse of 2 and your calculator doesn't do cosecant inverse, you do sine inverse of the reciprocal, so sine inverse of 1/2. That's the same as cosecant inverse of 2. Okay, so let's try another one. Let's clear this out. Okay, so let's say that we want, let me go back to black. Let's say that we want to do cosecant inverse of 1.49. All right, so we're going to need a calculator for this one. So that's the same as saying sine inverse of 1 over 1.49. You can put that in your calculator just like that, and you get 42.16. Okay, and remember we found cosecant of 42 before and we got 1.49. It's off just a little bit because we rounded to 2 decimal places. All right, but that's one of the first values that we looked at. So we can find cosecant inverse using our calculator and the reciprocals. Okay, let's say that we want to do secant inverse of 2.68. So that's the same as cosine inverse of 1 over 2.68. And that's going to be equal to 68.09. Okay, now a lot of times we do these in degrees just because with the inverse functions, degrees tend to be a little bit easier to work with. But you could also find it in radians. Just remember that you have to switch your calculator back and forth between degrees and radians. So let's say we wanted to do cosecant inverse of 3.42. And you say, okay, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. And that's going to be 1 over 3.42. And don't forget to put your calculator in radian mode. And you should get 0.2967 if we round that a little bit. Okay, so that's radians in decimals, since now we're using calculators and we're not going to get a nice pi over number. If you need an exact number, let's say that we needed this in exact radians, not rounded, then what you could do is you could put this in degrees. It's still not going to be exact because you're going to have to round it. So if you did this in degrees, you would get 17 degrees. And then remember, you know how to convert that to radians. You want to get into radians and out of degrees. Okay, so the degrees will cancel, and you get 17 pi over 180. Okay, but it's still not exact because we rounded the 17 degrees in the first place coming out of the calculator. All right, but either of those answers are in radians.